you'll find wedding website forums with just grooms being like, oh my God, I'm getting married in 3 months. I haven't got anyone. I don't know what to do. And I thought, oh, it's not just me. And if you look into the stats about men and friendship, or if you want to call it male loneliness, which I'm not sure is the right word necessarily, because I don't think guys relate to that. But if you look at men and friendship, men do have a friendship problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Momentum Lifestyle Podcast by myself, Blake Worrell-Thompson.
And me, Genoa Van Keekum. Momentum is a men's well-being and performance community dedicated to helping men be better.
Each week, we deep dive with your favorite thought leaders and experts from around the world to get their insights to help you be better. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we get started on this week's podcast, I want to talk to you about our Momentum Mastermind. The Mastermind is our 12-month program for men who want to surround themselves with other committed men, all with similar interests, values, and goals. Whether you're looking to build or grow a profitable lifestyle business, develop financial freedom, get in the best shape of your life, or create an intimate and epic relationship, the Mastermind is perfect for those who are looking to have it all. We know that to create these results and this kind of lifestyle on your own can be super challenging. So join now for your free 30-day trial. Simply visit our website, www.themomentumlifestyle.com.au. Up the top, you'll see a section for programs. Click on the programs, you'll see our mastermind, and you can sign up there now for your free 30-day trial valued at $1,000. We look forward to seeing you part of the mastermind. Max Billy Dickins, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Mate, really loved your book. Loved the humor that you put into it. Loved the effort and the research that you put into it. And also loved your wife's humor, which it was brilliant. So we'll talk about those in a sec. But before we get started, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Max Dickins. I'm a writer, basically. So my book I've got out at the moment, it's called Billy No Mates, How I Realised Men Had a Friendship Problem. We're going to talk about that a lot today, so I won't talk about that too much. I started my career in professional radio for a station in the UK called Absolute Radio, and then got into doing stand-up comedy, believe it or not. I was on the circuit for 7 or 8 years, which was fun / terrifying / relentless / taught me everything I know about everything and anything. And then got into doing books. And in my other life, I also run a improvisation theatre and training school in London as well called Hoopla. So improv's a big part of my life as well. So it's kind of two strands that kind of interact. And really looking forward to talking about everything with you now.
For the listener, and I love how your story kind of came to light, but for the listener, how did Billy No Mates enter the path of Billy No Mates and putting together the book? Where did the inspiration come from?
The inspiration for Billy No Mates came from just a personal experience. So I was planning on proposing to my then girlfriend, Naomi. So spoiler alert, now wife. So now you know the ending of the book, but there's loads of other good stuff in it as well. Anyway, I was thinking of proposing. And I go as far as going to a shop in Hatton Garden, which is a jewellery district in London, with a couple of female pals looking for a ring. And we get one, and then we go to the pub afterwards, have a glass of wine. And one of them says to me, "So who are you thinking about having as best man?" And I sort of mind blanked and just spluttered some sort of, filler. And just thought, I've had a couple of glasses of wine. That's why I can't think of anyone. Then I get home, get a pad out, pen, think, right, who are my best male friends? Put this list down. It takes way longer than it should. And when I look down at the list, the top 10, maybe 5 of them I work with. And the rest, I think, I haven't seen some of these guys for 1, 2, some of them 3 years. And I sort of realized in that moment, oh my God, where have all my friends gone? And then jumped on Google like you always do if you've got a problem. I Googled getting married, no best man. And there's just these millions of hits. And a lot of them, if you do it yourself, you'll find wedding website forums with just grooms being like, oh my God, I'm getting married in 3 months. I haven't got anyone. I don't know what to do. And I thought, oh, it's not just me. And if you look into the stats about men and friendship, or if you want to call it male loneliness, which I'm not sure is the right word necessarily, because I don't think guys relate to that. But if you look at men and friendship, men do have a friendship problem, and I'm happy to kind of unpack the stats here. But yeah, I came to this book through just a personal kind of revelation. I didn't want to write the book. I didn't have the idea until it happened to me. And then I was like, right, I've got to solve this for myself.
You're quite a charismatic, fun guy from the short chat that I've had with you and also listening to you on another podcast. So it's not like you lack social skills or even are socially inept as far as I'm aware. So what is it? And on this note, I resonated with so much of your book, and being someone who's late in his 30s, I can definitely see the recurring patterns for myself, but also for a lot of the guys that we work with. What is the cornerstone of blokes over 30 who struggle to create new male friendships?
Yeah. So, I mean, to kind of connect with what you said, this idea that we have of people who struggle with friendship, it's like the guy in the school lunch hall, right? Who's kind of eating his dinner by himself. He kind of smells weird, like he's got sort of crisps in his hair. Do you know that guy, right? But actually, he looks like me. I'm pretty quick to get around in. Can hold a conversation. It's not meant to happen to people like me, but it does. And there's tons of other blokes, as you said yourself. So there's a couple of things going on here. So I think we kind of want to unpack what we mean by friendship and what the problem actually is. And then we can kind of get into why it happens. So the two kind of things that happen to blokes. The first one is, well, a lot of men will say, I've got some mates. So mates you play soccer with, mates you go to the pub with, mates from work, right? But what they haven't got is close friends who maybe know them in any sort of meaningful, intimate way, if we want to use that word, intimacy. And I think men think about that in a different way. Maybe we'll get onto that later. And actually, if you look at the stats, like there's a survey that came out Movember, obviously the male mental health charity, which I think is Australian originally.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And it said something like 1 in 3 men have no close friends. And then what was interesting, the same study, they asked all these blokes, they'd asked about friendship. They said, who could you go to in your life to talk about something important, whether it be health worry, relationship worry, money worry? And half of them said, no, I can't think of anyone at all. So that's kind of like one dynamic in this, is that we're not disconnected. We can be outgoing and all that stuff, but actually the kind of other need, the close friendships, is where we come short. And then the second thing is this, which is, you said the word 30s. And actually, I looked at all the research into this. Our social world, if you're male, female, doesn't matter, peaks in your early 20s, basically late teens. Pretty depressing. And then our social world shrinks. But if you look at the kind of extent of that shrinkage, it happens a lot worse for men than women. So we turn 30 and that's when things get really hard. So why is that? Pretty simply, it's time is the most fundamental factor in friendships. If you don't have time, you can't invest and grow the relationships. And so it's that point in life where men really have a problem, and the problem is worse for women. And so we can maybe unpack the reasons why that is, but that's kind of the nature of it.
Time's a really interesting piece that you put there, because often when people use time for me as an excuse, I'll often reframe it into, it's just not a priority. So would you say that that's actually the case, that men don't prioritize male friendships? And understandably, there's career, there's your partner, there's a kids at some stage for most blokes in that 30 to 40. Is it a case that creating, nurturing, and I guess deep male relationships just get pushed down the order?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like your framing there about, time can be just used as an excuse, and as we rationalize stuff to ourselves. I think on the one hand, that men have less male friends and less close friends. I was talking about this with someone the other day. It's not necessarily the disaster it's presented it to be, because men are investing more time in being good partners. They're investing more time with their kids, if you look at the stats around that. So life is trade-offs. We have a limited amount of time. And so where you invest that time is going to say what you value. And what I find really interesting is I looked at some psychological research around something called self-construals. Sounds really boring. It's pretty simple. What it is where the researchers ask people, tell me about yourself, describe yourself. Sometimes they go, bring in some photos that kind of show who you are. and they ask men and women to do this. Women generally define their self, so who they are, through they call it interdependent self-construal, how they relate to other people. So they'll go, and these are all averages and generalizations, I should say. It's not true of everyone, but they'll say, generally, hi, I'm Cindy. I'm a husband of Gary. I've got 2 great kids, and my mum is so and so. Oh, and I love running ultra marathons. Whereas if you ask blokes, they have much more of an independent self-construal. So when you ask a man to describe himself, he'll go, yeah, well, I'm actually the 5th fittest guy at my CrossFit gym. I earn 100K a year. I, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and a wife, 2 beautiful kids. So what we value, I think, as men, and we can talk about it, we're socialized and brought up to value it, is often not how we relate to people. This is entirely true to me. Whereas I was obsessing over career stuff and would always put that first. And I think this is the thing with friendship, is you only realize the cupboard gets bare when you really need them. So how often in life do we actually sit down and go, where are my friends? Who are my friends? Pretty rare. Like when you need a best man, you literally have to write a list. We don't see it when we die, but when someone makes the list for your funeral, they're doing that for you. But we don't kind of do this audit. But because we don't prioritize it, if you look at the stats around bereavement, around divorce, especially around retirement, that's when men have worse mental health, worse physical health outcomes than women, because they haven't put in this effort, they haven't invested the time. So when the pinch points come, that's when it really hits. Because really, we can get by just about having a few people to have a pint with until we're like, the shit has hit the fan, who's here? So maybe that was a slightly convoluted answer, but hopefully we hit some kind of points here around your point of what are we prioritizing in this mix?
When it comes to putting in the effort, it's kind of obvious to a certain degree, but also not so obvious for obviously so many men. What's the before and after for you from that kind of, I guess, wake up call of like, fuck, who is my best man, to now? And the reason I say that is I had another interview with a similar guy who's actually a comedian as well. You guys have got very similar energies, and he spoke about putting in effort. Like, because when you catch up at the pub and you're watching a game of footy, you're talking shit, like it's fun. But he spoke about when he's not in front of that person, that he doesn't put a huge amount of effort in. And I noticed that I've spent, just been away with my partner for 6 weeks, and she's fucking speaking to girlfriends every single day. Like she's putting in the effort. And I'm like, fuck, should I be doing this? Do you know what I mean? And I was just like, there's a level of admiration for the effort that she puts in, but also just the level of like ease of which it just happens. But for you, when you had that wake up call and you're reflecting now, does it feel like effort? Do you put in effort? Has it become just a natural byproduct of the way you do life, or have you gone back to the before?
I definitely haven't gone back to the before. So there's a few things to kind of like address here. And the good news is if you listen to this and thinking, oh, this is kind of me, the fixes can be pretty simple, and you don't have to become this kind of totally new kind of cliche softy guy, right? I'm not going to ask you to write a poem to your best mate. Like, here's how simple it can be. I got a postcard today. I know a guy called Oliver. He's actually slightly older than me. He's, I think, late 40s. And I've known him for about 10 years, met through work and good mates. But he does something really simple. He will, every 3 or 4 months, if he's, I don't know, abroad, he'll write a really short postcard to a few mates. And it's like 4 lines and sends it. And you get it, and you're like, oh, that's nice. He thought of me there. And, it's pretty straightforward. He's not like doing anything mad on these postcards. But it's showing you that you're in his thinking. And I asked him, how do you do it? He says, it's pretty simple. When someone comes across my mind, I send them a text. And another little story connected to this. I know a guy, and I share this story because whenever I share it, it's the thing that people remember of anything I do. And it's somebody else's story, my mate of mine's story. So a guy called Steve, he's got loads of friends. I said to him, what's your secret? Why have you got so many friends? He said, well, my mates call me the Sherpa, as in those Nepalese soldiers that carry stuff up the mountain for everyone. And it's because you organize everything. But if you didn't organize everything, we'd never see each other. And I just thought that's kind of sums up this idea. Be the Sherpa, be the one that gets people together, that sends the text, gets them in the pub, organizes the boys' trip, not every week, but every few months, just put something on. Be the guy that texts someone you haven't seen for 4 months and says, hey, we got to have a coffee, or let's go to the beach, whatever it is. So these simple things, and you're absolutely right. Women are way better than this. It's like they are the switchboard, right? They're all doing it for each other. So when women and women are friends, you can see how that compounds, and that they're looking after one another. When men and men do it, we kind of stare at each other across the ether. None of us doing everything. And somebody said the other day, I heard someone say, for me, my male friends are just in an orbit, right? I know they're sort of there, but they're not present. And I was like, that's exactly what it's like. But here's one of the reasons why we need to be more direct with our male friends as blokes. And it's to do with what friendship is like. Without getting too wanky about this, it's a very ambiguous relationship, right? We opt into it all the time. There's no rules to it. It's very ambiguous. So if you're a guy, and how we normally relate to each other is taking the piss, it's kind of quite an active form of intimacy. We're not always talking about our feelings or telling each other we like each other. But it means that often we don't really know that our friends are into us. It can often being friends with a guy doesn't feel like friendship. So what we want to do is call it out a little bit more so people know it. And it can be something as simple as when a guy does something you think is great, just say, do you know what? When you did that, I just thought it was awesome. Or do you know what, mate? You're important to me. It doesn't have to be cheesy or anything, but we just got to call it out a bit more. And the before and after, I'm the one who's on the front foot now, and I think about this stuff, and I'm the one who's sending the messages. And what's been amazing is people message me now because they've hear about me doing this stuff. But also, I think there's a rhythm to friendship, and when you start that rhythm, you'll find you get it back. But you have to also accept that sometimes they're going to be free riders. And I wrote a blog about this the other day, and a lot of people say, like, why should I be the one who does all fucking organization? But I think you've got to see it as a cost of doing business, right? You have clients, some of them screw you around. It's a waste of time, waste of money, but it's part of the game. And I think sometimes in friendship, it's the same way. So the kind of the after is these simple habits I've put in place. And there's other stuff as well we can get to, but in terms of this kind of the work of friendship, that's what it looks like for me.
You're obviously quite a funny guy. Have you used humor in the past as a block and a coping mechanism for vulnerability or intimacy? And how was it received when all of a sudden you changed your tone slightly and started being intimate, vulnerable with people? Were they scared?
Yeah, I mean, humor was basically the only way I knew to relate to anyone, male or female. And it comes from, I went to an all-boys school for like forever. Literally the only time I would see girls was in the holiday, right? And all boys schools, have you ever been to one? They're brutal, right? It's like the banter is the way you do it. And you get really good at going ding, 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 shooting people down. And it's kind of, in a sense, great fun, but in another sense, the hackles are up, the moat around you of it, that kind of moat of aggression stops people getting close, but also talk a lot about permission. So how you connect to your mates defines the permissions in that group. So if you're route one all the time, if you've only got one gear on the gear stick, like I had, which was let's make this bants, then they don't have permission either. So I was unable to do it, and they were unable to do it as well because of the atmosphere I'd create around myself. And I wasn't a psychopath. I think a lot of guys, we see a similar thing, but that was definitely a problem. So then when I did try and change, and again, I didn't try and go 0 to 100 in 60 seconds. I didn't go like full Tony Robbins straight away, full Brené Brown or whatever. But I just tried to go first and share some personal information and actually share stuff that wasn't going well. And generally, I was amazed at how well it was received. They wouldn't always reciprocate immediately, but what would happen is in the second or third time, maybe they would. or they would volunteer. I'm trying to think of something I can share that's kind of specific. I'm trying to think if I can share this. I will share it. Going to like a relationship counselor, right? And I was talking about that with another friend of mine and another friend who was there. There was three of us, and I was talking about my experience there. And then this guy who I'd known him for 20 years and never said anything to me. I basically barely knew him. He was a good guy, but I didn't really know anything about him. Said, "Oh yeah, me and my girlfriend went to a relationship counselor." And 20 minutes into the first session, I was talking, and then the counselor said, I think you're depressed. And from that point on, I alone went to the counselor, and I've been going ever since. So I was like, oh, I learned more than you in about 4 seconds than I've known for 20 years. And it came from me sharing my own little thing, and not necessarily in a very articulate way, something that wasn't, that shiny and great about how things were going. And I was like, oh, wow, it does happen, but it might not always happen immediately. And I would also say friendship exists as a system. So we don't need everyone we're with to kind of be able to go there. I think you've got to think about, in the galaxy of mates, you've got to have enough avenues for that. And some of them aren't going to be into it or aren't going to be able to do it. That's their vibe. That's their journey. It's up to them. But again, like, this stuff doesn't have to be difficult. It's about going there first yourself.
Good answer. And I totally resonate with that. I think one mistake that many of us make is whether we find that personal development as the Kool-Aid and then we want to kind of push that onto everyone else, which is a fucking horrible idea, or we want everyone to represent everything and all of our friends have to be connected on it. Like, I've got mates that I could talk to for 3 hours about footy or our footy, AFL. And the only time they'll talk about anything emotional is at 2 a.m. after 2 bags and 25 drinks, and then they won't talk about anything else. But that's cool. Like, we can talk about footy for 2 hours and, they don't want to explore that. You mentioned your partner briefly there in terms of, something that you shared. What impact has you re-engaging with your mates had on the relationship? And you mentioned it, I think, in the book, and I think it's significant that blokes over 30 in particular, there's way too much weight on their relationship as their mate, their girlfriend, their counselor, everything. How has that dynamic shifted now that you've opened yourself up to friendships?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots here. I think lots to say. I mean, one thing is, I think this is true for a lot of men. Often, in a way, it's cute. They'll say, "My girlfriend, how many weddings have you gone to?" Someone stands up and goes, "I'm getting married to my best friend," and everyone goes, "Oh, how lovely!" And they probably are great, good for them. But for men, they're having a lot of their only route to these sorts of more vulnerable, more personal conversations is that person. Then that their partner, they're often very happy to do it, but it's a big responsibility. And they're often, generally, guys might not always be able to reciprocate in the same way. So often if you talk to women about men who they're friends with, they're like, I'm always one who gets the phone call, but then when I'm in trouble, they're not always there, or they can't quite go the full distance with it. So there's that side of it. I think also, if you rely on your partner for your social connection, they don't get their own freedom and their own life, which I think in a relationship is important. Some people are absolutely joined at the hip, and maybe that works for them. But what works for me and my partner is, I have my thing going on, she has thing going on. We often cross over. But before I went on this kind of whole mission to try and improve this, I was pretty reliant on her social network, and they're nice people, but she didn't have her own freedom. Maybe the third element here is, I think you can just tell from someone's energy, from their well-being, when they've been around their friends, they come back, they're a better version of themselves. You get the best of them. And actually, she likes seeing me around men that I'm friendly with, because there's a side of me that comes out, which is different and actually is often, I wouldn't go as far as say is attractive, but it's just, what it's like. You're just slightly different. And it's like, oh, that is the person that, I saw across the bar, or, you kind of can connect back to that. And I think that's a really important part of it as well. But And maybe a final thing I'd say here is that for me, the friendship thing was really important, but it was also a door into a lot of these things we've talked about, which I would have walked through if this hadn't happened. I think talk about masculinity is often talked about a lot. And I was like, I don't really know what that is. I think toxic masculinity, firstly, is a bit offensive and also sounds like Harvey Weinstein, right? So I'm not that guy, so I'm fine. Whereas when I started reading a bit about it and understanding, it was like, oh, I see how this shows up in my friendships. Like when I'm around guys, I'm different to when I'm around women. What is that? And go, oh, okay, that is that dynamic. A lot of it I've learned and it's constructed. It's a performance. So this has been useful more broadly and not just the friendship thing.
There was so much research and conversations that you'd had, and also you weaved in your own personal experience and humor really well into the book. What was your biggest takeaway from all the people that you spoke to, from all the research, and when you reflected on, I guess, your own situation? What do you feel like was the biggest takeaway for you in all of it?
The biggest takeaway was firstly, it's hard to comment. The first thing that came to me there was you've got to face up and be honest and go, do you know what? I haven't got enough friends, or the friends I do have, I don't really know. They don't really know me. So I think you've got to confront it. I also think you've just got to generally get it on the dashboard of life. So I've been thinking about it a bit, this new year. I think a whole bunch of well-being is about accountancy and what we measure and what we put in columns. Like, I can show you my spreadsheet here. I've got my income, my expenses. I measure that to death. I've got my Vanguard, your investment. You've got, the thing you're doing, what you're squatting. I can give you all the data on that. But really, I never used to have friendships or relationships on the dashboard as something I would think about and something I would try and optimize. Is too cynical a word, but do you know what I mean? It's like it's not something I would think about deliberately. And then maybe that was the second big thing: is you've got to be intentional. We have this idea, because it's been like that through our youth, that friendships happen naturally and organically, and if it's to be, it's to be. But you've got to be intentional about it as an adult, and that, I think, it's something that's going to take some initiative, some energy, some focus. And that was probably the thing long term that is the biggest.
In that kind of friendship piece, when you reflect on, I guess, the before and after, was there a denial? Was there a lack of awareness? Was it like, where in that whole situation that you found yourself in was the dialogue around male friendships? Did you think you don't need them? Did you think, there'd be shame if I reached out? Like, what was your own internal dialogue, up until the point that you realized that you had no idea who the fuck you were going to pick as your best man?
Well, I mean, the one answer is I could avoid it because I was busy, right? And I think it's true for a lot of guys. It's like a conga of projects. You're just permanently busy. And then when it gets quiet, you're like, oh, here's all the shit I haven't been thinking about. But, I've been busy with work. I've been busy, like I said, hanging out with my partner's friends, a bit of family stuff. And it's only when so it was quite easy to ignore what was going on. And to be quite frank, I saw friendship as an indulgence, right? I'm not obviously a type A sort of person, but I have always had a problem with overwork, frankly, and an obsession with productivity over relationships. And I'd almost see it as, well, if I'm hanging out with my mates and there's loads of stuff I'm not doing that maybe is going to affect, whatever, some vague idea of career. But this is maybe a bigger, longer, darker conversation. But I'd almost forgotten how to have fun. Like, I wouldn't, if someone said you've got all day Saturday, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Probably just going to work all Saturday. What do you do? What do people do on a Saturday? If you say go and see your friends, I'd be like, what do people do? Like, you got completely out of the rhythm of it because I hadn't invested in it.
I find that really interesting what you just said. And I think a lot of people relate to it. Do you think there's a societal conditioning that you shouldn't have fun? Like, life needs to be serious beyond 30? Did you buy into that? Or is there kind of some of your own stuff that was weaved into that belief system?
I think some of my own stuff, but I think, again, this is maybe a cultural idea. This is kind of what touch on masculinity. Like, what is a cultural idea of a successful man? It's a guy who's wealthy, got a nice car, career's going well, got a beautiful girlfriend, fill in the gap, right? And those were the things that I was trying to achieve. And there's nothing wrong with those things, by the way. But like we come back to maybe where we started about trade-offs, there are trade-offs. And I probably completely ran down one column on the dashboard or didn't even look at it to kind of focus on the others. And it all sort of caught up on me. So, I mean, it wasn't just in my 30s. It was probably getting into these bad habits through my late 20s and then into early 30s. But I think also we can talk about, again, this is a big conversation. I think society also sees, I think, male friendship as childish in some way. We don't really understand it anymore. And I think it's seen as something that isn't very serious. Why? Because often what men like to do with their friends gets branded as superficial, silly, childish, boyish. And a lot of men I speak to, when they're like, oh, when I say I just organized a trip away with some guys I know, and we went away and we did kind of load of, boyish stuff, and it was great fun. They're like, oh, but what did your girlfriend say about that? So it's not bad to do that. Like if my girlfriend said I'm going away with the girls, I just did it the other day. Go away, rent a house in Sussex, and like be there for the week. I'd be like, yeah, good for you, go for it. But I think what boys do or blokes is often seen in society now as not as serious as the archetypal cliche female relationship where it's talking about really serious stuff all the time. And like we said, it's about balancing what the relationship is capable of doing. But I think there is a branding issue with male friendship that you often see in how it's portrayed on telly, how it's portrayed in movies. So there's something for it there, I think.
When it comes to the males and the male friendships and all that you kind of just mentioned then, what's the difference for you in terms of how you feel pre and post? So what I've seen, and I think you actually touch on this in some of your research, although I could be wrong, is like you can have 100 people around you and still feel lonely if the connection's misaligned or there's no depth to it. But you can also just have one epic conversation with a bloke and be on fucking high from really feeling kind of seen. What do you notice now for yourself in terms of when you leave those conversations as a Sherpa, the term that you used, and as a leader in terms of vulnerability and intimacy? What's the difference that you feel with the friendships that you've got now?
I feel there's lots more people that when I'm not feeling great, I could call up and we can meet up, and they would be capable and open to having that conversation, and I would be capable and open to do that. That's a great feeling. I don't always want to do that, but that is something that's quite empowering. I've also noticed that, by being active myself, you kind of reap what you sow. You start getting invited to more stuff. People, you get a lot more messages. And like I say, that rhythm of friendship you get back into, and that feels great. You feel like you're supported. You feel like you're liked. And sometimes you get very tangible returns. Like there's another guy I went to school with. We were friends for 20 years. And I sort of think like, my God, I've known him for 20 years. I don't even know if he liked me. And then I started putting more effort in with him over this period of writing this book and trying to be more proactive. And I thought, am I really getting anywhere here? And he's kind of quite like a dry guy. You often can't quite read him. And then he was getting married. And then he asked me, he did it in a classic male way. Rather than say, do you want to be my best man? He was like, do you want to do the speech at my wedding? Like, what, like the best man speech? Well, yeah, we'll call it what you want. So you want me to do the best man speech? Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, all right. I'll do it, mate. I'll do it. But I was like, okay, we made progress, right? And I'd never been asked to be anyone's best man before. So that was great. So you see it happen, and it comes from being direct with showing I like you, more direct with affection, more proactive with I'm organizing stuff, I'm checking in, and also being able to at least occasionally have conversations that go 2 or 3 levels under the surface into you or into them, whatever the situation demands. So I feel more empowered. I feel like the relationships are definitely richer.
I love you used it then, and I think you used it in your book a bit. And I would envision it creating some kind of restriction and constriction within the male body, in that you use the language of like, I like you, like as a, do you know what I mean? I just imagine blokes thinking about you saying that and just shrinking. But what does that, because I love it, what does it look like for you to have those conversations? Do you still feel a sense of like tightness when you're being vulnerable? Do you still feel a sense of you want to resort back to your old humor? Like, what's that internal dialogue and process for you like now as you're trying to lead by example?
Oh man, I'm still absolutely programmed for bands. I can't like literally every second of being sincere about something. Like the kind of the schoolboy bit of my brain is going, make a joke. And like sometimes like also like the kind of the meanness. I like sometimes I'll say something, I'm like, whoa, okay. Didn't think that was still there. So yeah, it's something I'm still a work in progress, and like it's kind of quite deeply grooved. But it's much more comfortable now than it was. And I think a lot of it is about, I think it gets easier as you get a bit older and you actually like yourself more. So you take a risk and you're like, if this is not well received, I'm satisfied in my behavior and the risk I've taken. And I'm glad I've done that, however it's received. And generally, like I say, when you've done it a few times, you're like, this will be well received. So you're confident in it, you're less uncomfortable. There's a chapter in the book, and I changed names and a few details because you got to respect, people's private lives to an extent. I'm going to put them in the book. But it's actually the chapter I was super nice about a guy, like almost like 8,000 words about our friendship all through our 20s, and then kind of falling away from one another. But generally, it was just like so lovely about this person. And that made me deeply uncomfortable when it came out, thinking like, I'm being nice about this guy. And actually, I was more worried than him going, can't believe you've fucking written about me in a book. Because I didn't think he'd think like that, but think like, oh God, he's going to read it and I'm going to have to talk to him knowing I think that. But actually, it was great. He sent me a really lovely message back, and then we met up, and it was kind of getting much closer to how it was. But yeah, there is still a degree of discomfort. But then vulnerability is uncomfortable. And vulnerability is not just about talking about unpleasant stuff and about personal stuff. A compliment is a piece of vulnerability. Guys can't handle it. Like they can't handle giving it. They can't handle receiving it. How often have you given a compliment to a guy and they don't let it land on them? They just kind of parry it or make a joke, right? Because it is uncomfortable. But I think you've just got to exposure therapy, sit in it a bit, but also calibrate it. Like you said it yourself. If you're like Mr. Personal Development and you kind of got all the tricks and you've done the work, right? And the other person hasn't, they don't want it to be too softy. You've got to calibrate to them and go as far as they're comfortable. And then kind of the arc, get there gradually over time, I think.
Which is a brilliant point and actually ties in quite nicely to kind of where I wanted to go, that ability to build rapport and a dance of like,
yeah,
okay, I've put that question forward or I've proposed that idea, and just having a real level of awareness and attunement to see how it's received, and knowing that different relationships will kind of have different depths. If someone's starting out in this process of wanting to create better connections and probably even more challenging, create new connections, what does a bloke over 30 do, and where does he start?
Yeah. So I've got 6 tactics here. This is exclusive for you.
Awesome.
Right. Okay. So this is not, I mean, it's sort of in the book, but I've kind of thought about it some more as well and kind of trying to make it punchy. So the first one, I call it Auden's razor. Auden, W.H. Auden is a poet. Don't panic, guys. I'm gonna get there. It's not gonna be terrible. So this is kind of the Sherpa idea. So Auden said this. This is how he ended one of his poems. How should we like it were stars to burn with a passion for us we could not return? If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Right? The best way to have a friend is to be a friend. Be the one who goes first, who initiates. And if you're thinking, where am I going to start with that? Literally, fag packet audit. Get a tiny like post-it note, back of a bill, and go, who in your life are your mates that you like? Or who have they been in the past 5 years? Don't get embarrassed if you haven't seen them for a while, or you think they might find it weird to kind of hear from you, just do that for yourself. And then the first thing is just send them a text going, hey man, haven't seen you for ages. Fancy having, insert here, beer, coffee, whatever it is for you. So that's one thing. The second thing, I call it the tent peg strategy, which is that when you're in your 30s and beyond, life is brutally busy, right? And so you've got to build systems that allow you to have friendships even when it's not front of mind and you're not doing this all the time. So tent pegs are recurring things in your diary that you can come back to. For me, it was a five-a-side football that I would do fortnightly, every 3 weeks or so. I'd organize it and there'd be 10 of us, or some, people would change each time. We go and have a drink afterwards. But I knew if I fell off the wagon, friendship wise, we'd always have that. Some people play poker, some people, whatever it is for you, is you sort of have something like that. So what are the routines and rituals you can put in? Third thing is help yourself be lucky. So friendships, we're generally friends with people who are like us and people who are near us. Sorry to be so unromantic, guys. So if you want to make some new friends as well as keep up with your old ones, ask yourself something, a more interesting question, like what are you into? What do you want to learn? What are you kind of interested by? What do you like doing? And try and put yourself in those spaces, and you'll find over time, by being around lots of people doing the thing you like, you will end up going, hey, I've met you here enough times. We should have a drink after this. We should. And actually, the most awkward thing about friendship is going like, oh my God, it's a bit weird doing that whole will you go out with me thing. But actually, it doesn't have to be so intense if you help yourself be lucky to put yourself in those situations. Fourth thing is own it. Men generally get their mates through work or their mates through their partner when they're past 30. They leave their partner or their partner leaves them. They move jobs or whatever. They leave, the network goes with those institutions, those places. You've got to own it. So if you're kind of matey with some of your partner's friends, if you're matey with people at work, you've got to switch it to a different context. If you can do that, it will survive those changes. And then two more is that one is avoid the WhatsApp trap. I think it's very easy, the kind of cheap calories of social media, to think kind of the illusion of friendship and kind of get trapped in just those endless WhatsApp groups, or just kind of, the bi-monthly WhatsApp that kind of says everything and nothing, right? I think it's very tempting to be attached to your sofa these days with the whole virtual world. You've got to try and get beyond the apps, beyond the screen. And then finally, have better conversations. We've kind of covered that, really. But can you take some of these relationships up a few notches? So those are kind of 6 tactics, which I think are pretty practical, pretty straightforward. In the book, there's more as well. But like the top 6, that's probably what I'd say.
For those that want to read your book and check out your work, which I think, mate, I am an avid reader, and I read your book in 3 days, which I think every bloke over 30, and to be honest, I actually think every female who has a bloke over 30 in their life should read it to understand. Where's the best spot for them to get hold of your book?
Yes, the best place to get it. It is out in Australia now, I'm told. I mean, you got it, so it must be out there. You can get it on Amazon, of course. So I'm Max Dickins, and my website is maxdickins.com, @maxdickins on Twitter. So, for example, those tactics I shared, I've got a really good, if I say so myself, kind of long, medium piece even that I've written, kind of expanding on those if you want more on that. But the book is called Billy No Mates. It's out on all online retailers. There's an audio book which I read. So if you've enjoyed these dulcet tones, there's more where that came from. And I should say, guys, it's not just a woe is me tale. There are lots of jokes. And hopefully, I try to write a book about masculinity that people who hate books about masculinity would be like, hey, this is fun. I'm into this. So it's out in all good bookshops and online retailers now.
Well, not only that, and I guess to speak to my experience of the book, and as a male in his late 30s, someone who kind of resonates with a lot of it, is, for me anyway, my personal experience is you normalized and you neutralized a lot of probably shame that I had around being in a similar boat, in terms of like, is something wrong with me? Is it weird and awkward? What is this, I guess, deterioration of friendships? Is it me? And that personally helped me a lot of coming to terms with, oh, this is normal, and I prior to reading your book, I had a lot of dialogue myself around thinking it's me, and knowing also now that I need to be the solution, which ironically for someone who does this work hasn't been the solution up until reading your book. So you took a lot of my inner dialogue and you made it make sense through your own experience and also through the researchers and people that you spoke to, which really, one, put me at ease, helped alleviate probably some of the shame that I had around this specific topic. So yeah, I guess to give people insight into my own experience, that's mine. And I can only assume that there'd be other blokes who probably felt similar off the back of reading your book, if you've had some feedback yet.
Yeah, I have had some really lovely emails and messages from guys who've said that it's been helpful, and yeah, say a similar story to yours. Thank you very much for your kind words. But like that word you use, shame, there, I think it's kind of real. Like, you don't want to be that guy, as I said, sat alone in the lunch hall. And that's kind of what we associate it with. But actually, this has been a problem for blokes since they started measuring this stuff in the early 70s. So not only are you not alone in 2022, 23, you're not alone in the last 50 years. This has been a problem for guys, but there are tools, there are things we can do to fix it. So let's go do it.
Beautiful, mate. Really good to talk to you. Thank you for your book. And yeah, in a space that I work, where there's a lot of serious stuff around men's work, you did a really good job of mixing the serious with the research, with the humor between both you and your partner. And mate, really, would like to be friends with you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to be friends with you. This is great. Thanks so much for having me.